WCON 1170 Radio and Star Vision Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's indeed a pleasure to be back again this week on a beautiful week here on We Should Know, Tuesdays, 2:30 to 3:30, 7 p.m., Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Star Vision TV. We're now uploaded to YouTube. Many of you have indicated to me that you've been to YouTube, typed in We Should Know EDU, pull up the show, and it's kind of does not have commercials in it, so you kind of go through it rather fast, and I hope you'll continue to do that. Got a couple of quick comments we want to make. Got a program coming up April 26th right here in Clinton. Again, this is the second year, called Drive In to Sampson, Drive Out Drugs. April 26th, 5 p.m. to 8:30. Classic cars, new cars. The funds go to the Sampson County Meth Task Force, and it's to help buy materials for the middle schools to prevent and intervene some of the horrible issues dealing with addiction and controlled substances. Also, in conjunction with that, a separate event, a partner of ours has been a big supporter for a number of years, is Open Door Ministries down at Harold's, and we encourage you to contact those folks that are doing their annual charity golf tournament. David Chestnut down there at 590-6850, 590-6850. For more information on the Drive-In for Drive-Out Drugs, contact the City of Clinton. We're fortunate today to have with us a busy man, a man that's always got a schedule that's unbelievable, and we have with us the District Attorney for the 4th Prosecutorial District, Ernie Lee. Ernie, your schedule is unbelievable. Thank you for taking time to come in for a few minutes and talk to us about issues that's facing criminal activity, things that you see, and some of the horrific things. I know you've prosecuted a huge number of murder cases, but first of all, let's talk about you and what you're doing now, and a little bit about, your background is just exemplary background. Graduated from Campbell Law School, live in the Jacksonville area, married, got children. You're able to do that, plus a major in the military, carrying rank of an officer, as a JAG attorney there. For 20 years now. I think you were saying you were about to step out of that. Tell us about Ernie and how you've been doing it, and a little bit about your background.
Well, it's great to be here again. It's always great to be over here with you, JW. You do a great job on this show, and it's always good to be here. Yeah, I'm a pretty busy man. I've been district attorney now for over 2 years. Before that, I was an assistant DA for 24 years. So I've got over 26 years now as a prosecutor. I live over in Jacksonville. As a prosecutor, as DA, I have 4 counties in my district. I have Sampson, Duplin, Jones, and Onslow. So I have a very big district. I'm also married. My wife is from Duplin County. We have 3 children, aged 9, 12, and 6. So I have 2 girls and a little boy. So I'm very busy at work, but I'm also very busy at home. As you can imagine, with 3 children, my house is also very noisy at night. But stay very busy, but I don't do it by myself. I've got 33 people that work with me. I've got 18 assistant DAs spread out over the 4 counties. I've got 15 other staff, so I've got 33 people that work at the DA's office. With the number of cases that there is no way I could do all that. But I've been very blessed to have just an outstanding staff. I'm also getting ready to get out of the United States Army Reserve. I've been in for quite some time now, over 20 years, and I received my 20-year letter, so I'll be leaving the United States Army Reserve shortly. It's been a great 20 years. It's going by very quickly. They've given me opportunities I never would have expected. When I started out, I just finished a huge hearing up in Maryland where I prosecuted a case for the government, and then back in August I was in Germany, and I served as an investigating officer, sort of like a quasi-judge in a case. And so I've got to do a lot of things like that through the years. So I've been very blessed. Again, it's good to be here. I have a busy day, but I tell you what, I'm glad I was able to make it over here to Clinton today.
Well, again, we thank you for being here. And as you look back over that 25, 26-year period when you graduated from Campbell, did you ever see yourself being the district attorney, a district attorney in North Carolina, and doing the kinds of things you've been exposed to? I mean, was that part of your master plan?
No, it really wasn't. When I started with the DA's office, I was hired back in December 1986. I started the first week of January in 1987. Bill Andrews, 2 DAs ago, hired me, and I was always very grateful he gave me a shot. But I was not from Jacksonville, but I always wanted to be a prosecutor. And when I got there, initially I thought I'd probably be there for a couple of 2 or 3 years. I hear that a lot from prosecutors. But I really enjoyed the job. And I tell you, Bill Andrews gave me a lot of opportunities. He let me try some big cases pretty quickly. He gave me a lot of responsibilities. I really enjoyed the job. I guess through the years, a lot of people say, why don't you go into private practice? You can make more money. But you know, it's not all about money. It's not all about money. I just truly enjoyed the job. And I've often told people if I'd remained an assistant DA forever, I would have been a happy person too. I've been very happy. I love being district attorney, but I was also very happy being an assistant DA. It's just been a great career for me. I've enjoyed it very, very much. One of the things I've liked most about it, though, is I really think you can make a difference. I deal with a lot of individuals out there who come to our office because of the victims of different crimes. Just today, before I got over to Clinton, I was in Jacksonville this morning in 2 murder cases. And you know, I have to deal with a lot of victims' families. I've handled in excess of about 130 murder cases now. And that means there's 130 victims' families I've dealt with through the years. And, you know, one of the things I feel like as a prosecutor, I can truly try to make a difference in their lives. They come into me, they're hurting, they're sad, they're distressed, they're frustrated, all these things. They're angry sometimes, the defendants. And yet my job is to try to explain this system to them, because most had never been in it before, try to explain this system and try to guide them through it as best I can, then try to work at the best disposition I can on behalf of the state of North Carolina. I really enjoy working with people. And that's one thing, I don't shy away when meeting with people either. I have a lot of people stop by my office. It's not just murder cases. If I've had people stop by on traffic violations, I've had people stop by on really what some people might consider minor things. But the way I look at it, if someone wants to see me, I'm going to make time to see them. And here's why. Because even though some people may say it may not be the most important case compared to everything, it's the most important case to that person, certainly in that time in their life. And so I'll meet with people.
Well, you know, Ernie, and let's talk about it for a minute and just talk about the functionality of what you do, which I think a lot of folks really don't understand how the system unfolds and works. In reality, you know, we've got law enforcement people that are LEAs, law enforcement agencies out there. They employ people, and they go out and investigate various kinds of crimes and make arrests or traffic citations or whatever it may be. Ultimately, it comes to you for that prosecutorial part, that deliberate part to look at the factual evidence, information, to determine what you go forward with. Tell us how that works, because really it's a powerful position. If you as district attorney, you have that authority to say, you know, we're just not going to prosecute this, that's a huge, huge responsibility and a lot of power. So let's talk about that, how those cases flow and come to you. We got magistrates involved there, district court judges, Supreme Court judges, all these appeals courts. Let's talk about just the general process of how things work with that.
Excellent question, because the judicial system is a very large system. I'm just one small part of this big system we call the judicial system in North Carolina. It's really called the General Court of Justice. It's what it's called in our state. You know, most people are really not going to have much impact or contact with the DA's office, because unless you're the victim of a crime, heaven forbid, or you're actually charged with a criminal offense, you're probably never going to, you know, you could be there for jury duty, but a lot of people don't get called up for that. So there's a good chance most people won't have any contact with the DA's office. But here's what part we play. As a district attorney, my job is to represent the state of North Carolina in a criminal case. I do not represent individuals per se, I represent the state as a whole. So we represent the state. And the way we get these cases is unlike television, where many times in these shows the DA will actually out be investigating the case as well as trying the case. It doesn't really work that way. Now, law enforcement plays an integral part about this, and you're very familiar with law enforcement, JW. They are the ones who actually go out and investigate these type cases. Of course, one of my jobs, though, as prosecutor, pursuant to the Constitution of the state, is to advise law enforcement. That's one of my jobs. So even though law enforcement is out there investigating different crimes, my job is to advise them. For example, today when I leave here, I'm going to be back at the Sampson office meeting with law enforcement about a matter. And so as I have a constitutional duty to advise, which means we have to work together with law enforcement, because law enforcement deals with what's called probable cause to determine a crime was committed. Okay? However, I deal with beyond a reasonable doubt. I must prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm always addressing that with law enforcement. What can we prove in this case? Are we able to meet the elements of the criminal offense? Now, once an investigation has been completed by law enforcement, I will receive reports, or my office will receive reports. My job is to digest those reports, read those reports. Then I'll, of course, meet with law enforcement when I have questions. meet with witnesses, meet with victims, those type things. Prepare the case either for trial or for guilty plea. Now, ultimately, though, my job as a district attorney is to seek justice. Now, justice comes in many forms, and it also depends where you're standing as to what justice is. My job, though, is to seek justice, which means sometimes justice could mean seeking the death penalty. Sometimes justice could be life without parole. Sometimes justice could be a less serious or significant punishment. Or sometimes it could be probation. Sometimes it could be deferred prosecution. Sometimes it could be a dismissal. Because my job, again, is to seek justice. Now, I have to interact a lot with the judges. In North Carolina, we have, in our trial division, we have district court judges and superior court judges. Our district court judges will handle, in the criminal side, misdemeanors. They're going to handle the misdemeanor type offenses. Most people, if they have any contact whatsoever with the DA's office, probably some type of misdemeanor offense. This can be a traffic violation. It could be a driving while impaired, motor vehicle type offenses. It could be like simple assaults, communicating threats, trespassing, worthless checks. All those things are deemed misdemeanors. If you go to court in a misdemeanor case like that, you don't have a jury trial. You go only before a judge. So the judge must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of the defendant's guilt before finding that person guilty. So again, the burden's still on us, though, that being the DA's office. One of the things I like to clear up, a lot of people, I get this call a lot. For example, someone takes a warrant out against someone for, say, simple assault or assault on a female. Many times the victims will call our office and want to know whether or not they need to hire their own attorney because they're not clear that the state represents them. Of course, we always advise them, of course, they're always free to hire someone, but the DA's office is actually responsible for the prosecution of cases. We will represent them. That is our job. Now, we also have what's called Superior Court. Superior Court is going to be our misdemeanor appeals, and it's also going to be our felony trials.
So what we want to do now, we want to take a quick break. Sure. We're going to come back. I want to continue this conversation about the judge, the district court judge. But we'll be back in a moment. We're going to take a break now. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. You're watching We Should Know. We're talking with Ernie Lee, who is the district attorney for the 4th Prosecutorial District. You may not know Ernie, but we're finding out some things about what he does, what his job is, how it may or may not impact you. Stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know, Tuesday, 2:30 to 3:30, right here on WCLN Radio, Star Vision TV. Thank all those folks that view us out there. I want to tell you, if you will, go ahead and call a friend. We've got a very interesting program today, as a lot of folks have contacted me and they tell me about things they would like to see more of or hear more about. One of those things is always the criminality issues in community and the criminals and all these kinds of things and some of the horrific things we hear. We're talking none other than the Honorable Ernie Lee, the district attorney for the 4th Prosecutorial District right here in North Carolina. Ernie, again, thank you for being here. And we were just going through the whole process of not only your job, but how it actually fits in this whole justice process. And I really like your explanation of what justice is. Sometimes it's kind of a wavered line there, how you define justice. But we were talking about district court judges and what they do. That's not a jury trial, but you just indicated that oftentimes folks will come up if it's an assault situation or whatever it may be and say, well, I need to hire an attorney. Tell us why they may not need to hire an attorney and how you handle that, or how some of these folks at your 18 assistant DAs may help them with that.
You know, out there, when someone takes out a criminal warrant, there may be some civil side of that case. And in fact, if it's a civil case, which could also involve some assaults, they could in fact hire their own attorney, and that on the civil side. But as to the criminal side, if they are the victim of someone striking them, assaulting them, hitting them, then the state of North Carolina, that being the DA's office, will be their representative in court. In other words, but we're still representing the state of North Carolina. We don't stand up and say we're representing John Doe versus this person. It's the state of North Carolina. Why is that? Because it's a crime against the state when this assault occurs or alleged assault occurs. And so we represent that person to the extent that we represent the state of North Carolina. We will be the one who actually calls them to testify, ask them questions, and then they will provide responses. Of course, the other side, that being the defendant, can have their own attorney. Now, that is either going to be court-appointed or retained, or they have the right to represent themselves. Then they have the right to cross-examine that person. But we do get asked that a lot because some people just don't understand what the role of the DA's office. And I think it's been more pronounced in district court cases. Because I think In our state, we're one of these states where, in fact, anyone can go down to the magistrate's office and try to take out a warrant for assault, communicating threats, trespass, those type of offenses. It does not require law enforcement involvement for many of these offenses, particularly misdemeanors. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people go down to the magistrate's office by themselves. They must swear on the Bible that what they're telling is there's probable cause to believe a crime was committed and this person committed a crime. They must then convince the magistrate that there's probable cause to exist to take out a warrant. I think a lot of people, though, when they do that, they don't realize, though, that they're not going to go into court by themselves. Even though they may be the magistrate by themselves, when they come into district court, there will be a prosecutor there. And I can tell you, I've got a full-time district court prosecutor in Sampson. I've got 3 full-time district court prosecutors in Onslow because of the caseload. But that person will be representing them in the state of North Carolina. Now, when you get to Superior Court, that's a whole other ballgame there.
That's like a whole other level.
It sure is.
It moves up in what the detail, the definity, what the regulations are, and those kinds of things. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yes, Superior Court, unlike District Court, everything is recorded. In criminal district court, you don't actually have anyone transcribing everything or recording everything. So there is no actual record, and many times I'll hear about that too. Someone will call me and say, look, I just tried a case over there. This person didn't tell the truth. I want to see the transcript. Well, there is no transcript in district court for criminal cases. However, in Superior Court, everything is going to be recorded. You're going to see what's called a court reporter there who's actually typing up those things. And of course, the big difference in Superior Court is a jury trial. It is not simply before a Superior Court judge. There will be 12 jurors. And a lot of people don't realize this, that in the state of North Carolina, whether you are charged with capital murder, that means facing the death penalty, you'll have 12 jurors decide it. Or if you have a traffic violation appeal, still 12 jurors to decide it. So both of those will still have 12 jurors. And in North Carolina, the state is required to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, it's going to be a little more formalized in Superior Court. Of course, you have the jury selection, and then the state will do what's called the opening statements. The defendant can do an opening statement, and at that time you start putting the evidence on. And I've done excess of 230, 240 jury trials now. And my job is to call witnesses, present the evidence to the jury. And then after that, you do closing arguments like you might see on television. Then the judge will instruct the jury, and then the jury must decide. Now, a lot of people also don't realize this. A lot of people out there believe it's by majority vote. In North Carolina, it must be by unanimous verdict. It must be unanimous verdict in order to convict someone.
So each one of those jurors, when they get together, they've got to come. If there's one that holds out or abstains, then what happens?
It's what's called a mistrial, a hung jury, which means then the state has the option of trying the case again. But it must be unanimous, though. So in other words, to convict someone, you must convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt. If someone is found not guilty, that means 12 people agreed there was insufficient evidence to convict that person beyond a reasonable doubt. If there's some number in between, 11-1 or 111, whichever the breakdown may be, it's going to be considered a hung jury. And therefore, you could have a trial again. I've had several. I've tried a couple of murder cases that initially landed up in hung juries. One of my first murder cases, the jury hung up 11-1. And I retried the case again about a month later, and that second jury came back guilty. But that's the way the system works. The jurors are the ones you've got to convince, not simply a judge. In a criminal case, the role of Superior Court judge is to rule upon evidentiary things, like objections, like you see on TV. The judge must make findings of law, and then the judge must also instruct the jury. A good way is the judge is sort of like the referee. The judge is supposed to be impartial, objective. Most of the time, the vast majority of the times, the judges don't know anything about the case prior to it being called up. And if they do know something, it's probably just based upon the motions or something they may have read in the file. But the vast majority of the time, the judge doesn't know anything about the case you're calling up. And therefore, they're supposed to be impartial and objective. They make rulings. They've got to decide. I stand up and object. The judge has got to decide whether or not it should be overruled or sustained.
Talk about those terms for a minute. You hear a lot of that, and I know people say, what do they mean when they say sustained? What does that word mean? We know overruled is kind of obvious, but what does sustained mean?
If you say objection and the judge says sustained, that means it's not coming in. So anyway, that's...
so you got to move on to another question.
You got to move... Well, actually,
or another direction, maybe, or another approach.
Yeah, you got to listen to what the judge's ruling is, because obviously if he makes a ruling up there, you don't keep on... If he rules against you, sustained, then you don't keep going on that same line of questioning.
Would not be a good idea.
Would not be a good idea, because he's already ruled upon it then. Now, lots of times, if many times in court, unlike television, many times in court we'll just say objection, and the judge clearly knows the basis for it and will just make a ruling right then, without really much explanation. However, there are many times, though, that you'll be in court where you'll make an objection, and the judge will say, I want to have further arguments, which means the jurors will step out of the courtroom, and then the lawyers will go up there and present their arguments to the judge, and the judge must decide whether or not to sustain or overrule the objection. You got to listen very closely, though. That's one of the things, particularly as a new prosecutor, you've got to listen very closely to what the judge is saying. I've seen some new lawyers that will get up there and the judge will rule one way, and I think they misinterpreted the ruling, and they'll keep going, and the judge will, of course, draw them back. And that's one thing, too, in our system, is ultimately in a superior court setting, it's up to the jurors to decide. Not every country in the world has our system of justice. Our system of justice, I suppose, is open to criticism, or some people do criticize it. And it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but it's the best that can be devised by man. And because I think it does work. I really believe in the jury system. You know, it's amazing. We will spend 3 years in law school trying to learn the law, and yet we'll try a case in a week in front of a jury, and then the judge will instruct them as to the law. That law may take 30 minutes to instruct them. Those jurors are expected to learn all that law in about 30 minutes, whereas, we spent 3 years. But it's amazing the good jobs I believe the jurors do. And like I say, justice is served by guilties, it's served by not guilties. I've never been one to criticize the verdict of the jury. Even I've argued my point, I've argued my case. If the jury says not guilty, that is the decision, because that's the way our system is set up. And frankly, unlike a lot of countries where you go before a judge or panel of judges, here you're going to go before your citizens in the county you're from. And it should be probably people that, or obviously people who are impartial, fair, can be objective.
It's kind of speak to the folks, and I think most people, as you said, probably don't really get involved in the system. And one way they do get involved in the system, as you mentioned a while ago, is they get a jury notice. What would you say to folks when they get a jury notice as far as them serving? Oftentimes there's a fear. You hear folks go, oh, I don't want to go down there. I'm scared to go. What would you say to a person? Everybody's always got conflicts, I know, but what would you say to a person to encourage them to participate?
I would say, do your jury service. And here's why. There used to be a judge who's passed away now who said the 3 greatest things you can do as a citizen of this country is vote, is to serve in the military, and to serve on a jury. Because you can actually have an impact in the criminal system or the civil system. I would encourage people to serve on the jury. Now, obviously, there are going to be those instances where you can't because of medical reasons or whatever. But if you have an opportunity, I would encourage you. First of all, it gets you part of the process. And obviously, if no one would ever serve on a jury, we can never try a case. So I would encourage people to don't be fearful. I've heard from so many people afterwards, after a trial, I might get a call from a juror or a letter from a juror, and some of the comments are very favorable to the extent that they learned so much while they were there. Because it's not like TV. This is the real deal. And I just think it actually puts in part of the process. It really does. And I would hope everyone would want to serve on a jury and encourage them to do so, because one day it could be you, your family member, who needs a jury to decide some issue, whether criminal or civil, involving them. And again, I would encourage people to do it. It's just a great thing to do. I got called up for a jury duty there in Onslow County. Of course, I live in Onslow, so I got called up for a civil jury. But they settled, so I didn't actually get to decide. I've been called up for jury duty twice in the federal court down in Wilmington.
We'll take another break, and we'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Mr. Ernie Lee, who is the district attorney for the 4th District. Stay with us, call a friend, tune in, and find out what's going on in the court system. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You may be riding down the road to listen to us on WCLN 1170 radio. You may be watching us at home on Star Vision TV. We're on Tuesdays, 2:30 to 3:30. The name of the show is We Should Know. It's also a replay at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on Star Vision TV. Want to give a shout out to a lot of the folks out there that support us. Robert Stroud with the Boogie Shoes Radio Network that continues to announce some of our shows, give us some good comments. We appreciate that. Wayne Weeks, who does the Gospel Hour at 10:30 on WCLN. Also Don Smith and the Country Store. We thank all of those folks for mentioning us and kind of keeping us in mind, and we appreciate that. We're talking with the Honorable Ernie Lee, the District Attorney for the 4th Prosecutorial District. Ernie, again, thank you for being here. We're talking about the functionality of court, what's going on. We have talked about district court, the judge. We've talked about jury, folks serving on jury. We've talked about superior court. We've talked about the jurors themselves and what they do. It's an arduous process because we live in a country of laws. Thank God for that. Let's talk about some of the things and I guess I want to kind of move to that area of some of the more, should I say, horrific kinds of things you deal with, and those are homicides and murders. You have had quite a track record of dealing with some very unusual cases of murder, and I think a lot of folks look at this area and they see maybe what happens in the newspaper, but when it hits your desk and you get involved in it, it's very detailed, very articulated. You got to go through layers and layers of evidence, and all of those things have to be put in order. And tell us about that, and maybe an example of one of the more, I guess not necessarily horrific, but one of the more cases that have been more publicized than some of the others.
Yeah, that's one of the toughest things about my job is dealing with the murder cases, simply because for every murder, that means there's a murder victim. And that means there's a family out there attached to that murder victim. And I've dealt with a lot of them through the years. I've dealt with some very, obviously distraught, upset parents who's lost a loved one like a child. I've done that a long time, and I can tell you it'll be kind of tough on you sometimes, because what most people want is I cannot give to them. I mean, we talk about justice and all those type things. We talk about the system, what's going to happen. But you know what these people really want is their loved one back. Unfortunately, I cannot do that. I wish I could snap my fingers and make everything all right for them, but I can't. And just recently I dealt with a mother over in Duplin County. It was just so heart-wrenching because she lost a family member. And you're trying to explain to a mother, who's lost a child, this is the system, this is what you can expect, but I still think they leave sometimes with an empty feeling. But that's one of my jobs, to have to deal with murder cases. Right now we have 24 defendants charged with first-degree murder in this district. We have 24. We've actually got our numbers down some. That's still a lot, but we've got them down significantly.
They're all pending trial.
In pending trials right now. Matter of fact, this morning in Onslow County, I was working on 2 of those cases, meeting with the attorneys in that, and then made contact with the victims' families in those cases before I came over. But yet, I deal with a lot of murder cases. Right now we have 3 defendants pending in Sampson County. I wish I could get down to 0, but we have 3 right now. I have 6 over in Onslow County, and my largest number right now is Duplin County. Mm-hmm. And I just have I have 14 pending over there and 1 in Jones County. Mm-hmm. But dealing with murder cases is, we've already talked about law enforcement has to go out and investigate. I will then get a lot of documents. For example, just recently, I think it was like 3,000 pages that I've been going through in a murder case that was delivered to me by the SBI and the Sheriff's Office in the case. And that's a lot of documents. I'll go through each and every one of those documents. Even though I'm the district attorney, I stay heavily involved in murder cases, and I've got some trials coming up actually. But I will go through those page by page by page, because what I will do is actually try to summarize those in a manner that I can present those in a clear fashion to the jury, which means many times I'll take a notebook and get it down to this much in terms of a notebook of what I need to cover in that trial.
Because it's got to be understandable and concise.
Absolutely. I can't go with 3,000 pages. I've got to have it really prepared. I've done some pretty notorious cases through the years. The biggest one I've done over in Sampson County is the Kenneth Hartley case that happened up in Plainview. Very, very sad case, and I just love the victim's family in that in terms of just some of the nicest people. Just tragedy just struck them. And that was an individual, Kenneth Hartley, who had been charged with killing his family, 3 members of his family. That was a capital case. Robbie Thigpen, an assistant DA, and I, we tried it together. And it took us 8 weeks to try that case. And I drove back and forth every day. And it was a very time-consuming trial, a ton of preparation, because we had a lot of lab work in that case. Fingerprints, blood evidence, DNA, autopsy, photographs, all that, so we had to put that in a clear fashion. I guess the biggest, if you want to say biggest, because they're all big, but I guess the one that got the most media attention was probably Cesar Lorian. I tried him, that was back in, August of 2010. That case was actually an Onslow County case, but got transferred over to Wayne County. The reason is because of all the pre-trial publicity.
Change of venue oftentimes happens because of
That's right.
publicity.
The defendant made the motion to change it to another county, so we went over to Wayne County. And I think that took about 2.5 weeks to try that case.
That actually brought the national cameras here and so forth. I mean, that was hitting national media. So
it sure did. I can recall very well that there in the Onslow County Sheriff's Office parking lot, there were CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all sitting out there because, again, this was making national news. And fortunately, that we were able to get that individual back from Mexico and actually try him. And, of course, he was convicted of first-degree murder. It was not a death penalty case, though. And I get asked that a lot. Why wasn't that a death penalty? The reason is because Mexico will not extradite unless you waive the death penalty. So we didn't have an option. If we're going to get him back to try him, you've got to not seek death because Mexico does not allow the death penalty in their country. But nonetheless, we tried that case, took 2.5 weeks. Again, that was a very difficult case to the extent that just the amount of discovery, about the amount of paperwork I had to go through. I spent many months preparing for that one, many, many months. And so, those type cases are difficult. And I've got, like I said, I worked on 2 this morning. I've got one coming up June 3rd there in Jacksonville. So I'm going to be trying another case very shortly.
Huge time-consuming things. There's a lot of stuff happening in the legislature.
Sure.
You deal not only with cases that has been laws have been changed or court actions, but the legislature in developing new laws that you have to deal with. And one of those that folks has probably seen on TV, and I'm just kind of interested to see how you deal with this and maybe prepare for it mentally as you think about dealing with this law, is the Racial Justice Act. Sure. Talk to us about the Racial Justice Act, because it's actually pending action by the legislature. I don't know whether it's going to be repealed. What's going to happen with that? Tell us what your sense is about that and basically what it is to start with.
Yeah, the Racial Justice Act was enacted by the North Carolina General Assembly, and it's already been modified or amended since the initial enactment. But what that law did was basically scrutinize capital cases, that being death penalty cases, and this state is a death penalty state, to scrutinize those cases and try to determine whether or not there was any type of racial bias that may have been involved in either the selection of the jury, the trial of the case, or any aspects of the case. And they're according to that act, if there's any type of racial bias whatsoever, then of course the defendant should be switched to either life or life without parole. Well, the problem with the initial statute, though, the way it was enacted was you could use statistical information in order to determine whether or not race was involved in a case, which means this. Under the initial act was if in fact you tried a case in Sampson County and received the death penalty, then lawyers could file a motion under the Racial Justice Act using statistical information from any county in the state to determine that there's racial bias somewhere in the death penalty. And one of my big opposition to the way this act was written was, what difference does it make, or why should it make a difference, or what effect should it have on a case in Sampson County if someone brings up some information from, say, Durham County, and I just chose that one randomly, or Cherokee County, or Guilford County, or any other county where something may have occurred, I'm not going to say it did, but just may have occurred, and somehow affect the death penalty in this county. And that was one of the big opposition I had to it. I can tell you, as a prosecutor, I want racial justice. Because I want justice.
Sure.
I want gender justice, because I want justice of all types. But the thing is, the way this act was written, it pretty much just ties the hands of the prosecutors in trying to seek the death penalty. Secondly the problem with this, it also takes it sort of out of the hands of the jury. We have 12 jurors who sit there for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever the case takes, listen to the decision, or listen to the evidence. They've made a decision. And then most of these cases, if not all these cases, have been affirmed by the North Carolina Supreme Court. So we've been through all the appellate things, now all of a sudden these motions are filed. Why should this act be allowed to take the place of the jurors' decisions? because that's what I just think it just sort of does away with the jury process. We have a jury to decide whether or not guilt or innocence. We have judges to make sure there's nothing wrong going on in the trial. For example, every time you pick a jury, the defendant at that time can always raise what's called a Batson motion. It's a United States Supreme Court decision out of Kentucky, which basically, if there's any inference or any evidence that the prosecutor is discriminating in any way in the selection of jurors, the trial judge is to address it then.
And it's not just racial, it's any evidence of bias.
That's right.
It could be gender or...
Yeah, and the judge can jump, is by law, he has to address those. And you know, in my opinion, the judge is the best person to know what is going on in the trial. He's actually sitting there. Versus what's happening now under the Racial Justice Act, they're taking transcripts and reading those over. And it's just simply more of a statistical thing. Just looking at numbers without knowing really the true answers or how the people were, their body motion or their body language or something during the trial when you're picking a jury. All those things come into play. You know, one thing about it, as a prosecutor, look, I am so busy trying to just make sure I've got my case together, and I think I'd speak for all prosecutors on this, trying to make sure I've got my reports together, my facts together, I present everything to the other side, that there is no time for any type of racial bias on the part of the prosecutors. We are simply trying to do the best job we can. And you know, race is not a factor. We look at the cases. And is this defendant deserving of the death penalty based upon the law? That's what we're looking at. And
we're going to take a break again, and we're going to be back in a moment. This is a very interesting discussion. It affects everybody and something that oftentimes is a very hot button for people. So we ask you to tune in. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment with We Should Know. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Having a program today, like the program I've got today, I always enjoy sitting down talking with Ernie Lee, the district attorney for the 4th Prosecutorial District. We talk sometimes, and I had a viewer, it's been over a year since I had the district attorney on, and the viewer said, well, you know, I believe y'all just sat there and could talk all day. Well, I probably could. I enjoy talking to Ernie. He's been a friend for a long time, a friend of the people for the 4th District in the state of North Carolina. Ernie, again, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you. This is kind of our last segment coming up, if you will, and I want to get some kind of what I call big bullet items in, and I know that you're always a person that I can trust to give me an observation. I know there's not a lot of detail on some of these things, but there's something called Ethan's Law that is being looked at now, and talk to us about that because it deals with murdering a pregnant woman, and we talked a little bit about murder. Give us the kind of the quick overview of what that is and what your observation is.
You know, this was a law that came in effect actually December the 1st of 2011, passed by the North Carolina General Assembly. This actually comes up, and there's actually now made it a criminal offense that if you actually were to kill a pregnant woman, and then as a result of that, the unborn fetus also dies, then that you could actually be charged in that. And you know, I think it's a very important law. I've actually had a case pending right now over in Duplin County involving this issue. So it's a very important law. It's one that not only does involve murder, but also manslaughter. It actually makes it a criminal offense. You know. And of course, now there's going to be some of your viewers out there say, you know, well, how about abortion? Well, I can tell you that is exempted under the statute because that is deemed to be a medical procedure. And but you know, they have said that in fact, and the way it reads is that willfully and maliciously commits an act with the intent to cause the death of the unborn child and causes the death of the unborn child in perpetration or attempted perpetration of any criminal offense is a murder.
So for example, it would be a domestic violence situation, goes bad, the mother is pregnant, the mother is killed, and the fetus is killed. At that point in time, that is 2 murder charges?
That's the way they've got it written. And, you know, the thing about that is, because actually I've had cases before where someone, a lady might be pregnant or boyfriend, husband, or whatever, get angry and actually want to do harm to the child, unborn child. And we really didn't have much recourse until now. We did not have any recourse. This statute, though, allows us to do that, particularly if the child is killed.
Another follow-up question on that. A person is involved in, as you just indicated, they may want to do damage to the unborn child. They do something, hit the mother or what have you, and it causes the death of the child.
Yeah.
That person could be charged with
right.
murder. Even though the mother is alive, the child died, so he gets charged with murder.
That's right.
It's important, folks, I think, to understand that.
That's right, and that's something from December the 1st, 2011. I understand there's more amendments now before the legislature to maybe to broaden that some.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll have to wait and see what the legislature does because they're in session right now.
The important note there, I think, is think before you act.
That's
think
exactly
long
right.
and hard.
That's exactly right.
Another issue, and this is one that I know that you've looked at, this issue of immigration, which is a national issue, and I've had a number of folks say, well, you know, that's a federal issue. I'm not getting involved in it. But we live in an area of North Carolina that, as you know, that is huge in the area of immigrants here, of folks working here, good, honest, decent people. But that issue of immigration and the immigration law, how much does your office get involved in that, or do you see situations coming up that we're kind of pushing back from enforcement of that federal law?
Well, you know, actually we got some state laws too about voting and things too, but my office has gotten involved a few times, sometimes like some voter fraud type issues. Usually we have the SBI come and investigate those actually, but I've had a couple of cases myself dealing with that. You know, it's one of these things in terms of voter registration. Obviously, we want to make sure the system is supposed to be one person, one vote.
Absolutely. And go ahead and tie that in while you're talking about it to the voter ID law.
Yeah, right now there's something before the legislature, sort of a hot button issue around the nation right now. You know, in terms of voter ID, I think one of the things probably the General Assembly needs to address, though, is why they're talking about this is, if in fact identification is going to be required, who's going to provide that identification? Because so many people don't have driver's licenses.
That's true.
You know, there's a lot of people. As a matter of fact, I was reading something that maybe several hundreds of thousands of people in this state that would be eligible to vote who actually don't have a driver's license. So therefore, you've got to address those people. Okay, if they don't have a driver's license, what type of identification are you going to provide them?
What is accepted? What's valid?
What's going to be accepted and what's going to be valid? Because obviously, I would want everybody that is eligible to vote to be able to vote. I mean, that's our democracy. And so, but obviously, if there's people out there who should not be voting because they're not citizens, you know, obviously, you know, I don't want them voting. I also don't want people voting more than one time, you know, in any particular election. I mean, obviously, the voter laws must be enforced. This is an issue that the legislature, if they're going to pass some type of voter registration, voter identification, they need to think about, though, how about those law-abiding citizens out there who pay taxes, do all those things, but for whatever reason don't actually have an identification card, like they don't have a driver's license. Is the state going to provide those to them free of charge, or what's going to be the system for that? And that's one of the things I need to think about, because again, I want people to be able to vote. It's one of the most important rights we have, and I can understand. Obviously, you got to control it because you just got to make sure you vote once.
Well, now there are some states I understand that have this law in effect, and they require that folks obtain a voter ID card unless they have a driver's license.
Yes.
They obtain a voter ID card, but they have to pay for that card. Is that a constitutional legal issue? I think that's being debated now, whether you can do that. And as you know, there's a huge group that has a pushback on this.
Yeah, because obviously, what if an individual is indigent? In other words, they just simply don't have enough money to go purchase these things. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who live day to day and live paycheck to paycheck, and they just don't have, you know, the extra funds to go to do that. Or if they're working and they can't just take off to go get some type of identification. And then the legislature also got to decide is going to be like a photographic identification or what. So there's a lot of issues still out there to be debated about this. I've seen different things coming out of the legislature. I know there's probably be a ton of amendments on this when it's all finally settled. But obviously, though, my office, if there's voter fraud, my office would get involved now. And again, I've called up the SBI before in cases like that.
So I'm not trying to pull you in on this one, but it's a question. It's a big bullet item out there. The whole big bullet item is on gun control. From your seat as District Attorney in North Carolina, you kind of see it all. You're pretty much on a high limb in the tree and you can look down. Have we got issues related to gun control? Do we need more laws as it relates to gun control? Are there adequate laws on the books now? The states need to do something. We need to push back and let the Congress of the United States work it out. And do you see anything coming? That's a bunch of questions I've hit you with. But
well, you know, obviously we have a Second Amendment right in this country to bear arms. The United States Supreme Court has ruled that the private individuals have the right to bear arms. That is in our United States Constitution. And I support the Second Amendment. I think as a prosecutor, my job, along with U.S. attorneys, district attorneys around the state and nation, our job is to prosecute those people who violate the laws on the books about firearms, and that's going to be your criminals. Unfortunately, so many of my cases involve firearms, so many. But these aren't law-abiding citizens out there. These are people who, in fact, have intended to commit a crime, whether it be homicide, whether it be murder, whether it be rape with a weapon, whether it be some type of offense like that. And our job is to prosecute those people. Now, one of the things we have been doing, we've been very adamant about this in my district, is for those felons who are subsequently charged who have a firearm, because that's a separate crime, firearm by felon, we have been aggressively prosecuting those individuals. We've also been very aggressive in our habitual felons. In other words, those people have multiple offenses, many of which involve firearms. After you've had 3 felonies on the 4th one, the punishment gets increased a lot. And we've been very aggressive about habitual felon. I really do believe it means really law enforcement, the DA's office, enforcing the laws that we have now. We have a lot of laws in the book in the state concerning firearms, carrying concealed weapons and things like that. And it's my job to enforce those. And I tell you, I've tried my share of armed robberies. And but for the grace of God, really there's been so many people out there who could have been the victim of a homicide because somebody comes in with a firearm to rob a convenience store and whatever, they got their finger on the trigger. But I had one who was actually shot, but for the grace of God, he did live. And but I just see so much violence done with firearms. But it's not the firearms that are issue, it's the person holding the firearm. And these people are bent, as the courts will say, bent on mischief and criminal intent. And those are the people we need to go after.
And it seems on the national level now, at least it's come down to a publicity agenda. I know the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, has got ads running in North Carolina trying to convince folks. And the interesting thing to me, and I think we've talked to some folks on this show about it, they have folks depicted as if they were from Eastern North Carolina. I suspect they're probably actors from New York or somewhere. It looks like average Joe down the street saying, you should have more controls and that kind of thing. But none of the situations have indicated that any of those controls would have changed the outcome of those situations at all, especially when we look at some of the horrific kinds of shootings.
Particularly because most people are law-abiding citizens. In
Absolutely.
fact, and are hunters, which North Carolina is known for its hunting and things like that. I mean, these people have the right to a firearm. We've got to keep the firearms out of the hands of these criminals.
We've got a number of issues on the books. I'm about a 15-second response on this one. There's one just come out this week, increasing the speed limit to 75 miles an hour on certain roadways. You got any issues with that as district attorney?
It would depend on where the roadway is.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would hope the Department of Transportation would determine the number of accidents on that road, particularly if there's any residences or businesses. I mean, in fact, I travel a lot of roads in the state, and some of them seem to be pretty wide open, and I can certainly understand driving 75 on those roads.
Good deal. Okay, here's what I want to do. I want to give you about a minute for wrap up. Tell us something we need to know, something that kind of you've had some concerns with, and maybe you can shoot that to us in about 45 seconds or so.
Okay. One of the things I always want the people to know out there is, first of all, even though you may not know who the district attorney is, you may not know my assistant DAs, or even know much about my office, we're still open and accessible to the public. We're not up on some hill somewhere. We are actually accessible. I have an office right here in Clinton. I have an office in Kenansville. I have an office in Onslow. I have a part-time office over in Jones. We have assistant DAs who are available to help people. Furthermore, people are free to call us. If you have questions or concerns about something, if you don't understand something, for example, you read something in the paper and it doesn't seem right what happened in a particular case, call the DA's office. Just don't go over the rumors you hear out there in the public. Call the DA's office and ask us.
Isn't that a wonderful invitation? Give us a telephone number right quick.
Okay, my Sampson County number is 910-596-6661.
Thank you again, Ernie, for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching We Should Know. We're coming to you on WCLN and Star Vision TV as well. We look forward to seeing you again next week on the radio as we bring you a new show.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question or comment regarding this or any episode, please send your email questions and or comments to jwsimmonsedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday afternoon beginning at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.